On today's show, we're going to examine the quarterback landscape for the 2025 fantasy football season. We will discuss all the ranges from elite quarterback down to streaming quarterback and how to implement a strategy, all from a redraft 12-team home league perspective. I want to start with elite quarterback, and I want to identify what we mean when we say elite quarterback, because I'm not even sure that this version of elite quarterback that we're seeing even existed when I started playing fantasy football. Like, Michael Vick never threw for more than 3,300 yards in a season. Dante Culpepper never ran for more than 609. Meanwhile, we have multiple guys out here now. We have Lamar Jackson throwing for 4,000 and throwing 40 touchdowns and running for 900 plus yards. We have Josh Allen accounting for 40 plus touchdowns and racking up 4,000 passing yards. It's just a different level. So I'm curious, Leone, how would you define elite quarterback here these days?
Yeah, it's tough. To your point, too, I think teams that are good and have good quarterbacks nowadays really lean into that more than teams used to in the past. And also teams that are on the opposite end of the spectrum might hide their quarterbacks a little bit more. So it accentuates the gap and it becomes more predictable up top. That was, I don't want to speak for JJ, the original late round QB guy, but one of the premises initially is we weren't even great at predicting like exactly who the top quarterback would be on a given year or what the gap would be. Whereas with these quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, we know that if they have a healthy season, they're going to be a top 5 per game fantasy quarterback. There's almost zero doubt in that because their teams are so good and so reliant on the production coming from the quarterback position, and it can be done on the ground. It can be done through the air. So when I think of an elite quarterback, I essentially think of a quarterback that is going to be top 5 regardless of injury and really has very little downside from a skill perspective or just from being immune from the elements of whatever's happening in his environment to his team around him. And I think Allen and Lamar really typify that more than any other quarterback. We'll talk a bit more about, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts, who are QB 3 and 4 pretty much by consensus, but have maybe a touch more risk to them on a per game basis than Allen and Lamar do.
Yeah, well, it's also not just over the course of the season they're going to be a top 5 quarterback. I like when we do the DFS projections, like we're getting some massive projections on a week to week basis with these guys. And I think, from an output, from a result perspective, Josh Allen had some crazy streak, like 15 straight games with 20 plus DraftKings points. I mean, even on a week to week basis, they're extremely predictable. And I think like Leone might be able to speak to it better. I think the error bars on our projections at quarterback are way smaller than they are at running back, wide receiver, tight end. So it's not just they're elite, they're also predictable on a season long basis and a week to week basis for what we're getting.
Right. On a per game basis last year, if you kind of combine Lamar and Allen, they averaged, a little over 24 fantasy points per game. Burrow had an absolutely nuclear passing season and was still just shy of 22 points per game. So there were only 6 quarterbacks in the entire NFL that cleared 20 fantasy points per game. Everybody else was kind of at 19 or below. So, they're clearing the majority of the position by 5+ points per game.
Right. Okay. JJ, who made his name and his brand off of being a late round quarterback guy, and I was always a late round quarterback guy. Also, what do you think about the current state of the quarterback position as a whole and how elite quarterback fits into your strategy these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely different than when we started doing this stuff, right? Like when I published the ebook, that was in 2012 with the late round quarterback. And back then, you had pocket passers being drafted in round 1 and 2. And if you look at year over year correlation of passing points per game versus rushing points per game at quarterback, passing points per game has a 0.03 R squared. So there's literally no correlation between how many passing points per game a player has one year to the next year versus rushing. It's like 0.6. It's like 60%. Like that variation can measure. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a completely different game. I think like I always go back to the Lamar MVP season, the first one that he had, as obviously he was a late round quarterback that year, but it was one where the market really started to flip and the market started to realize, oh, wow, these guys who can do both things are really, really valuable. And then we get an influx of like, Josh Allen being able to do it, Jalen Hurts being able to do it, and now hopefully Jaden Daniels being able to do it. And we get this influx in talent. And so now, oftentimes whenever we're doing our analysis or like a lot of, people do analysis for fantasy football, they're looking at it just strictly from like a VORP perspective, like a value over replacement player perspective. And that might tell you that like Josh Allen is X number of points better than his baseline player, and then a running back is X number of points better than his baseline player. But the thing that always goes sort of like untalked about VORP and about that kind of calculation is the predictability of that calculation. And if the predictability of it is stronger, even if it's a slightly worse VORP, that player still actually has more of an advantage for you to draft that guy because there is that predictability. So, I mean, look, I think that you can make an argument very easily that you should go elite quarterback in fantasy football. It just depends on the environment that you're in.
Okay. Speaking of environment that you're in, let's start, JJ, with the top two. I consider Lamar and Allen a tier above just because they've done it. It would not shock me to see Jaden or Hurts finish as the number one quarterback. I don't think it would shock me, but I do consider a separate tier there for the top two. Now, a lot's going to come down to where these guys go in your draft, Allen and Lamar. We have them as like pretty strong third round picks right now. I suspect in some home leagues, though, these guys might come off the board in round two. JJ, how do you think about actually drafting Allen and Lamar this year?
You know, the interesting thing is that in leagues where, because I have them around where you guys do as well, as like a, maybe early, more top half third round for like an Allen and maybe a little bit later for Lamar. But the irony of these home leagues and like a team drafting them in round two, because like the home leagues are where we're going to see those guys probably go a little bit earlier, like into the second round, and hopefully not the first round, but into the second round and such. The funny thing about it is those are the leagues where going after those players is arguably easier to do, because we know we can make up finding running backs and wide receivers elsewhere because the competition isn't as stiff, right? And so it's a lot easier to sort of go in that direction. I do think, though, that in like a normal league, you're looking at the right kind of opportunity cost in like that early third round range is where you're going to start thinking about it a little bit more. And, to anyone who's been grinding best ball drafts and stuff over the summer, you kind of feel a drop in opportunity cost around that time in the draft too. It's like a way easier time to go after them. So it's kind of a nice spot, not only from like some of the calculations I've done with like where that combination of projectability and VORP kind of aligns, but also where the market has let things be and let things settle at running back and wide receiver this year.
Yeah. And so I think if people are going to be like, you know what, I'm just going to take them in round two, I don't want to chase it up the board. However, in these leagues where I think I can win at running back and wide receiver so easily, I'm not sure I want to pass on all four. And so maybe that causes me or other people to start pushing Hurts and Jaden Daniels up into round three. If those other two guys start going in round two, Leone, would you consider Jaden and Hurts part of the elite quarterback tier? And how early would you take those guys after Lamar and Josh go?
Yeah, I mean, they're close. I definitely think they're a tier below. I'm 100% agree with you, Adam, in terms of the predictability component of this. We know Allen, Lamar are going to be there. We think Jaden Daniels is very likely to be there, but he has only done it once. If he regressed like we had a CJ Stroud type regression, it wouldn't be totally shocking. Now, Jaden Daniels is a much more robust fantasy player than CJ Stroud was. So even if he regresses in real life, he's going to be a much better fantasy contributor. He ran for nearly 900 yards. He does too, if you're just looking at per game points last year, he does get shorted a little bit relative to Allen and Lamar because he played like two partial games. One he left due to injury, and I think one was week 18. So just want to note that. Even with that said, I'm a little shaky on taking these guys in round three. With Hurts, you've got an offense that's designed to really run the ball very well and has an amazing defense. There are some situations where if Barkley gets hurt or the defense regresses, I think where Hurts could go nuclear and does have this really huge ceiling. It's just the team's so darn good that I don't know what the odds of that happening are. So round three still seems a little bit early to me. Like, I think I'd rather take shots on, Amari and Hampton, Breece Hall at running back in the middle of round three. I will say a lot of the round three receivers are pretty shaky. Devontae Adams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba, Terry McLaurin, a ton of these wide receivers that they all make me a little bit squeamish. I think that's the point JJ was making about if you've been doing best ball drafts and you sort of feel that. So I don't think it's the worst thing. I would take Jaden over Hurts, but yeah, I really think their 2-3 turn where you can get Allen and Lamar is pretty good, and where I would try to get my edge in a home league, knowing that like maybe I'm sacrificing some value there, but I'm going to more than make it up later,
Right.
and I'm going to lock in this very predictable edge at one position. But I would not chase it up, like you said, into early round 2, because we have a very deep 1.5 rounds in skill players that once you get to like Brock Bowers, Loud McConkey, like you still want to be taking those guys over a quarterback in round 2.
Yeah, and my point being, and I'm going to go over so much of this strategy stuff as we move along here in the draft kit, but I mean, you can get Jaden Reed at pick 100. You can get Ricky Pearsall at 106, and this is aggregated ADP on season-long sites. Pearsall, a 106. Matthew Golden, 111. Emeka Egbuka is down here at 120 something, and that's not like, I'm not saying that's definitely going to stick in your league, but you're going to be able to get them much later than you are for anyone that's been doing best ball drafts. I just want to double click on Jalen Hurts for a second, JJ, because he's one that I have struggled with. We're a little bit behind the best ball market on our Jalen Hurts rank. I find myself taking him probably more than our rank would suggest, because I think there's a big tier break. After you get past these 4 guys, I'm like, after that, maybe I'll get into some Mahomes, maybe. But after that, I'm down to like, all right, fine, I'll just take 3 pocket passes or something that we'll get into later, Fields, and 2 pocket passes, something like that, where I feel like there's a big tier break after Hurts. And to Leone's point, no one's promising that the Eagles are going to be able to run the ball so much again. Like, yeah, I think they're going to be really good. There's outcomes where Jalen Hurts has to throw the ball more, and that's certainly baking in some of their regression. So I've struggled with the Hurts ranking and executing. What do you think about Jalen Hurts, JJ?
I really like Hurts this year. Part of it is I'm trying to stay grounded with like what we do know and what we have seen historically, with not just like pass rates, because obviously Philly had the second lowest pass rate of any team since 2011 last year, and that's a number that almost always regresses to a mean and will improve. You know, we know that, like, more than likely they're going to throw more this year. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how would that happen, right? Well, number one, like, they ran pretty good with Saquon last year in terms of health, and so if that goes south, then obviously they'll probably end up throwing the ball more. Number two, they have a really tough schedule. When you look at win total, it's a bottom 5 schedule in the league. And then the third thing is, yes, their defense is really good, and I'm not denying that at all. But we also know that there's a lot of volatility at defense year over year. Like when we look at historical data and we look at how that generally goes. And so I'm in, because I like, if you look at what he's done in games where he's had 90% or more of Philly's pass attempts, he's averaged by season 22.2, 22.3, 25.2, 21.5, and then in a small sample as a rookie, 25.2. Like even in a situation last year where they were really, really run heavy, and they're not going to be as run heavy this year, he was still incredibly good in fantasy football. And maybe we could make this argument if the tush push was banned, like maybe if they did go that direction. But to me, I think that this is a scenario where we're like, it's easy to look at them on paper and say, this is the way this Eagles team looks and the way that things should go. But we know that's just not how things go down in a given season. Like, there are going to be unforeseen injuries. You know, a defense might just like not be quite as good as it was the year before, and then all of a sudden things go a different way. So I really like Hurts. I think he's pretty close to Daniels, and I've been gobbling up. Like, I think that he's a pretty good value right now.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask about how to employ this, because I think we are all in agreement that these 4 guys are pretty strong picks. What kind of league, though, JJ, do we take them in? And my first thought is half PPR, right? Half PPR with at least 4-point passing touchdowns. Obviously, 6-point passing touchdown is better. But when we start to get into full PPR, that's where I start to get a little bit shakier on going elite quarterback, depending on where they go. In half PPR, though, I am all over elite quarterback. The other spot where I think it matters, and I don't know if you guys disagree, but running setups, leagues that don't have a flex. So in other words, you start 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and that's it. Quarterback is going to make up a larger portion of your scoring there. You don't have a flex spot to play an extra wide receiver. And so to me, that's another ideal spot to take elite quarterback. So those were the 2 off of my head that I thought were the best spots for it, half PPR. And if there is no flex in your league, JJ, any thoughts on that or any other spots where you are leaning into more elite quarterback teams?
Yeah, I think, you know, what you're sort of saying is any league that shifts sort of the supply and demand equation of the positions, right? Where if you have more of a shallow league where you're only starting 2 running backs and 2 wide receivers and no flex, then obviously you're going to raise the demand of quarterback because there's not as much demand for running back and wide receiver. The other one I'd say is just goes along with that. But I think that, and we've talked about this in the past, but when you're in league, like a lot of times for some reason, people think that if you're in like a deeper league in terms of like a 14, 16 team league, they think that you should be going after the elite quarterbacks because you're getting more of an edge at the position in that case, but you're starting double the amount of running backs and wide receivers. So actually it's the opposite. In a shallow league, 8 teams, 10 teams, you should be going after quarterbacks because your team needs to be that much better because all of the teams are going to be really good. You need an edge as much as you possibly can get at every single position. So that would be the other one to call out, I think. And obviously, like SuperFlex and stuff like that, we already know, but any place where the supply and demand equation shifts is one where you should be changing your approach.
Yeah, Leone, anything to add on that before we move on? And do you think this is generally a good year to go elite quarterback? I think is a fair question too.
I struggle with it. I think, JJ's note on shallow deep leagues makes a lot of sense because there are a lot of late round quarterbacks I like this year. And in a deep league, I think you can really probably take advantage of that by building out your skill player positions early and taking advantage of these late round quarterbacks. In shallower leagues, it might be a situation where, yes, there's a lot of value on the board in late round quarterbacks, but that's still not the optimal way to build your team. You're still better just locking in that elite quarterback early. So it's difficult. The quarterbacks I'm trying to avoid is kind of like that Joe Burrow type range, like these pocket quarterbacks, Baker Mayfield, that probably get way pushed up in home leagues because of their finishes last year. Those are kind of your old school elite quarterbacks where they're a little bit less predictable year over year. Burrow's going to be very good because their pass rate over expectations so high each year and he has amazing pass catchers. But last year was the perfect run out for Cincinnati where they had this horrendous defense. They were playing with urgency and Burrow just went absolutely ham. But that's like his ceiling. Like he hit this ceiling last year and, he still fell behind these very elite quarterbacks. So I would try to avoid that range. I guess I'm kind of going with these very elite top 4 guys that we talked about, or probably in most leagues waiting to QB 12 or whatever into the 120s even pick wise, and really just making sure that I'm beating people not only with my starting roster spots, but having some of the absolute best upside bench stashes.
All right. Well, let's move into that mid-range now. Leone mentioned Burrow. Burrow's ADP, and again, I'm looking at this aggregation of season-long ADP, 37 right now. That's obviously laughable, right? He cannot compete with the Russian quarterbacks. I think in most leagues, where he goes in best ball right now is more in the 50s and 60s. Even there, we have him as a bad value there in the 50s and 60s. All this stuff about pocket passers regressing in terms of TD rate year over year is just so strong, JJ. And I have no desire to chase the pocket passers who threw a lot of touchdowns last year. What people are going to say is Joe Burrow is an outlier case. All these guys who regressed didn't have Jamar Chase. They didn't have T. Higgins. They didn't have one of the worst defenses in the league. So I know that we're not going to be able to take Joe Burrow at 37. JJ, what do you think about Joe Burrow more like in the 60s? And then any other thoughts on the mid-range quarterbacks here this year?
Yeah, look, it's hard for me to really get behind it. This is obviously a season-long discussion, so it's different in a best ball environment. But, it's tough. When you look at top 6 quarterbacks in particular, and not only guys who are pocket passers, but guys who are coming off those high touchdown rate seasons. And actually, if you look at top 18 quarterbacks in general by ADP, the guys who have lower touchdown rates the previous season tend to outperform ADP expectation at a much, much higher rate than the alternative the following year because everything's just regressing, right? Because one guy gets boosted up too high because of his touchdown rate the previous season, and one guy doesn't get boosted up enough because they're like, oh, he wasn't good last year, therefore he's not going to be good this year, right? One of the interesting things is if you look at players who have sort of bucked the touchdown rate trend in the past, especially the higher end quarterbacks, one of them over the last decade was Joe Burrow, where after it a 6.5% touchdown rate, the following year, he actually gave you pretty strong production. But, and so a lot of people will say, well, Joe Burrow is an outlier because of that. But if you look, he had 3.5 rushing points per game that next season because he found the end zone 5 times on the ground, which is not something that we can project whatsoever. It actually sort of plays into the idea of what we're talking about here, that rushing is just so important at the position and can give these guys that extra edge. So to me, I just, I do think that Burrow from a projection standpoint will look better than a standard pocket passer that you're going to get in the double digit rounds, right? Like, I think that we should establish that as opposed to just like anyone thinking, oh no, he's just like another pocket passer. No, like he's going to give you a better floor ceiling combo than like Jordan Love, right? But I think that the argument is, when you get into the double digit rounds and you have this giant cluster of pocket passers, and we know that we're kind of throwing darts to a degree, like we're trying to be smart about it. Like we're going to like Dak a little bit more. We're going to maybe like Jordan Love a little bit more or whomever. Like we're trying to be smart with it. But at the same time, we're getting such a discount with those players when we know that some of them are going to have the ability to have an outlier touchdown rate season. And if and when that happens, they're going to be pretty close to matching Joe Burrow's production. I'm just going to wait. Like I'm not going to use that round 5 cost and price tag because the opportunity cost is really strong there. And I think we'd all agree that round 5 range and then into round 6 in like home leagues, the wide receivers there are awesome this year.
Right.
And so I think the opportunity cost is pretty significant for Burrow.
100%. Yeah. And I was going to bring up the opportunity cost thing, which I think is a great point. People are going to say, oh, you guys are just talking about TD rate. Lamar Jackson had 8.6% touchdown rate last year. Why are you not talking about it? Leone, we have knocked down Lamar's touchdown rate significantly, and we still have him as just it sounds like JJ might have Allen ahead of Lamar. I believe we have Lamar slightly ahead of Allen, and that's even with regressing that TD rate down there a lot. But anyways, on the mid-range, Leone, I totally agree with the barbell strategy. Either you're going elite or you're waiting. And the guys that I had listed that I think are going to go in the mid-range were Burrow, Kyler, Mahomes, Baker. I actually do like Mahomes a lot this year. The Rashee Rice thing gave me a little bit of pause. Mahomes was down at 4.5% touchdown rate last year. If there's anyone that can spike it back up to 6.5%, 7%, getting his weapons back, especially once Rashee Rice and getting the offensive line squared away again, Mahomes is the biggest candidate to me to be like, oh yeah, of course Mahomes got his TDA rate back up into the 6-7% range. So Leone, any more thoughts on the mid-range here in this whole TD rate discussion?
Yeah, I mean, I like Mahomes better than our rank a little bit because you can kind of envision that upside. And they are a team that, again, if you're taking a pocket passer, you want it to be on a team that's going to lean into the quarterback position. Cincinnati, KC, they're going to be positive pass rate over expectation near the very top of the league year in and year out. And we know this. The issue is it's still just going to be overvalued by the market in home leagues.
Right.
I mean, we're looking in best ball. I've been taking a lot of Mahomes. You get him in the 80s into the 90s. You can stack him up. In redraft home leagues, looking at the Fantasy Pros consensus ADP, he's going in the 5th round. With that, we talked about being squeamish taking Burrow in round 5. Yeah. So I'm really kind of avoiding that. And you can really see like our positional rank delta on the other quarterbacks that had high TD rates last year, which, wasn't Mahomes. He's the bounce back candidate, but we're low on Burrow. We're low on Baker. We're low on Jared Goff. Like those are the guys that we're going to kind of avoid. And there's also an element of even like Kyler Murray. I like Kyler Murray. We have him as an ADP value. I think he's fine. But there's just going to end up being so many opportunities in a 1 QB redraft league that once you hit that point in the draft, I'm probably still taking the bench stashes I love the most because, yeah, maybe Kyler's a slight value, but Caleb Williams is going to go very, very late and has upside. Justin Fields is going to go pretty late and has a ton of upside in 1 QB leagues. JJ mentioned Dak Prescott. So I'm really probably avoiding this mid-tier QB range unless it's a natural stack. I still think stacking's good even in redraft. It's not only a best ball strategy, but I really, would want the value to be there. And I'm probably waiting until at least pick 90 plus if I miss out on those top 4 elite quarterbacks.
Okay. I think we're all in agreement there on kind of a barbell strategy at quarterback, which brings me to the later round options. Like I mentioned at the top, it was not that long ago that I thought late round quarterback was right almost every time. And a big part of that was not just the predictability or the explosiveness that we talked about with the guys at the top now. A big part of it was rushing quarterbacks would be available super late. Yeah. I'd wait for everyone else to get their quarterback, and then I would take Dante Culpepper or whoever. Or maybe I could take 2 matchup dependent quarterbacks with big ceilings. The market now is sharper, but more importantly, like some guys slip through the cracks. And we talked about Jaden Daniels last year, who was going in like round 8, 9. Like Yeah, no one knew exactly how good of a rusher he would be at the NFL level, but just the idea that he could be, I thought made it just take a shot, late round quarterback. And you can say the same thing about Bo Nix. Bo Nix ran for 50 touchdowns in college. I know he's not a rusher like Lamar or Allen or Jaden, but these guys that just have something. So I'm somewhat surprised, JJ, knowing all this, that Justin Fields is still going around pick 100, right? And people are still like, Justin Fields sucks. I don't want to take Justin Fields. It surprised me still that Anthony Richardson, we can talk about his bench risk and we should talk about that later. It surprised me still that you can get him like pick 180 or something like that, even in a redraft setting where if he's not starting, just don't start him or cut him or whatever you want to do. So I'm surprised that these rushing quarterbacks like Fields are available this late. JJ, any thoughts on Fields as the target for the late round quarterback bros this year?
Think he's got to be the go-to, right? Like got to be the easiest one to just sort of look at and say, all right, like if things break his way and hit his way, we can envision him being in the top 5. Like it can happen. I mean, if you look at what he's done historically, I looked at his whole career and then I removed, because his rookie season was just pretty dreadful. There's not even just because of circumstance, but because of him. If you look at since his rookie year in games where he had at least 90% of his team's pass attempts, he's averaging 19 and a half standard points per game. That's a 4 touchdown pass or point per touchdown pass, -2 for interception league and format. Last year, 19 and a half points per contest would have been the QB 7 in fantasy football. And we're drafting him well past that, especially with the injury scare going on right now. We're drafting him well past that. And then on top of that, obviously this is a situation where we should be striving for upside in general. Like that's the thing that like drives me nuts the most about late round quarterbacking and has always driven me nuts the most. But like Jared Goff, for instance, right now is like in home leagues will probably be like QB 10, QB 11, right? And again, you can make arguments in best ball just from a stacking perspective, but when you're looking at a player like Goff and his profile, a guy who finished in the top 10 for the first time in years last year from a points per game perspective. Last season, he still has not had 20 points per game as a quarterback, and people are drafting him because they'll say, oh, he was the QB 7 last year, he's the QB 10 this year, I'm going to draft him. Or, he's a player who has been in that QB 9 to QB 13 range year over year in Detroit. So clearly, he's got a stable floor. It's really irrelevant at the end of the day. We should not be drafting that way in general, but let alone at the quarterback position when it is so replaceable. I've been tracking streaming picks on Living the Stream, my other podcast, for literally 10 years now. And as much as that podcast has devolved into a poop podcast, it is in a bathroom etiquette podcast. We are tracking these picks, and we are consistently, even in today's landscape where it's so much more difficult, to your point, Adam, to like find guys off the waiver wire and stream them confidently because the rushing quarterbacks aren't really there. We're in like that QB 10, QB 11 range with our Frankenstein every year. And that's without the benefit of picking up Baker Mayfield last year and just using Baker Mayfield week in and week out, right? Like we're using bottom of the barrel guys each and every week. So Jared Goff's production is literally irrelevant at the end of the day. Like it's just not that important. So yes, I know that I went in a lot of different directions there, but to your point, yes, Justin Fields, an obvious late round quarterback for me, but also like we got to lean into that profile as much as we possibly can, because like Jaden Daniels last year, the downside just did not matter at all.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, ADP, season long ADP right now, Goff 96 overall, Fields 113 overall. And so if I miss on the top 4 there, I'm just going to be like, I'll wait it out and I'm going to take Justin Fields and might take another pocket passer or someone like that who I like. And the guys that I like later, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, Drake May would be my favorites. And like pairing those guys with Fields and finding good spots, I think I can live and win like that. The smaller the league, the weaker my opponents are, the more likely I am to go elite quarterback. Leonie, are we too excited about Fields and any other late round quarterback thoughts for this year?
No, I think JJ's point about focusing on the ceiling is really important, with the floor not mattering, because if it doesn't turn out right, you can just stream or pick someone else up. And there's so many quarterbacks. I mean, quarterback's pretty deep this year, like into the 20s, that there's going to be guys on the wire that you're going to be able to pick up unless everybody's carrying 2 quarterbacks. So I do like that. If I was pushing back against Fields a little bit, I think it makes sense to cut out that rookie year, but I also think he has run a little bit pure on the rushing side of things. Even last year in terms of the rushing TD rate and kind of some of those nutty plays he had with Chicago, it's certainly there, but he also has shown a very low floor for a rushing quarterback because of the inability to kind of just generate a good real life offense at times. But most of that downside, as JJ noted, just isn't super important. I think taking two quarterbacks is fine. Like in the past, I've been just take one quarterback and redraft. Why would you take two? But I think there's an element of it to like, you want two shots at the guy that maybe has the Baker Mayfield season that JJ pointed out. Jordan Love and Green Bay could see a huge increase in pass rate this year. CJ Stroud was basically going in the Joe Burrow range last year. I think we can go back to him. I think Tua is interesting. That Miami defense is in shambles. He's got playmakers. His efficiency whenever he's been healthy has been awesome. So he's someone you can take super late. I mean, there's a lot of guys. There's a rookie in Cam Ward with a good rushing profile. So I'd be taking two quarterbacks. I think Anthony Richardson would be a staple of that. If his cost doesn't rise, it looks like he's got the leg up in winning that starting job. But you talk about upside. I mean, Anthony Richardson's upside, in my opinion, is like higher than Justin Fields is if he's starting every game on a per game basis because of his profile and his size and the ability to use him. And he could be a bit of a unicorn. He could also just end up being really good still. We don't know. So I really like that aspect. Very easy. If he loses his starting job to Daniel Jones, you just drop him. That's fine. You pick somebody else up. He goes so late. So I like doing that. I do struggle with, I see a lot of value on a lot of these quarterbacks, but how much is it really helping me is sort of the, crux of this conversation and the difficulty. In two quarterback leagues, I don't know if we're getting into that later or not, but I guess I would just...
Let's save that for later, yeah.
Okay, I'll save that then.
By the way, comparing Richardson to Fields, I think is interesting, JJ. For those guys who don't know, JJ is actually a Pittsburgh Steelers laundry bro. When they lose, he comes home and kicks his dog and yells at his wife. It actually affects his mood and his life. And I thought, from an outsider's perspective, not a Steelers laundry bro, I thought Fields, from a throwing perspective, looked way better last year than he did in Chicago. And that was with this idiot Arthur Smith and very little weaponry around him. So I am not writing off Fields as a thrower, but if I had to make a bet right now, who is a better NFL caliber thrower, I think Fields is a better thrower than Richardson. Doesn't mean I think he's a better fantasy player, because Richardson can do some crazy things on the ground, just like Fields. But yeah, how would you compare Fields and Richardson, JJ, and how are you handling Richardson in season long right now?
I think Richardson in season long has to be a target at this moment, just given all the news, right? Like if he starts week 1, then he can be a top 12 easily quarterback in fantasy football. I think the difference between Fields and Richardson from like a production standpoint, I would agree with, because I'm kind of agreeing with both of you here. So maybe that's me just kind of playing the middle, but I would agree with Adam from the standpoint that I prefer Fields as a thrower of the football because Richardson has been so dreadful. But I think that I understand what Leone's saying, because situationally, look at personnel in Indy right now. We have to feel better about what's going on with their weaponry and what he's working with versus what's going on in New York, where Josh freaking Reynolds is running as the wide receiver too. Right. Yeah. So I think that too is kind of intriguing. Weapon wise in Indianapolis, really strong. Like if they had their quarterback solution, we would be feeling really good about the Indianapolis offense overall, more than likely. And so if Richardson turned the corner, which we know the odds of this, of him being Josh Allen, are literally like less than 1%. But if something good happened and he is a better thrower of the football, I don't see how he's not the obvious like mid QB2 or what have you, wherever he ends up going, to really catapult himself, into the top 6 conversation.
Yeah. All these other guys that go back here, JJ, I would consider them matchup-based streamers. And so when I'm talking about I'm going to carry 2, I get what Leone's saying about maybe finding the Baker hit. But at some point, I just would be like, you know what? This guy's home against the Bengals today. I'm going to start him. And this other guy, like when you get to that level and you start playing matchups, guys that I would include in there include Caleb, Bo Nix, JJ McCarthy, Herbert, I guess Stroud, maybe Stroud and Love, although I don't feel as good about those. Any of those stick out to you this year, JJ, in terms of the later, hey, I'm just going to stream these guys in the right matchups?
Yeah, a couple other
Dak too, sorry.
Yeah. The guys that you mentioned for sure, second year quarterbacks I found like versus ADP expectation are usually the right kind of upside picks to make because the market is still not totally warmed up on them based on their rookie seasons. Most quarterbacks, if they have monster rookie seasons, they get catapulted in ADP up in the top 6, like we saw Stroud last year, Jaden Daniels this year. But when they don't have that, typically they're the right kind of bets to make because we will see them outpace ADP. And even guys like Caleb Williams obviously had a pretty dreadful statistical season last year. But if you look at players who got a second shot after that bad of a rookie season, a lot of them kind of crushed the next year. Like even like the Blake Bortles of the world, like guys who like went on a horrific path from a career trajectory standpoint, they were still good in that second year. So like, I really like Caleb. I like a lot of those second year quarterbacks. Two others that you guys didn't throw out there that I'll throw out there, Trevor Lawrence with Jacksonville and Liam Cohen there. And just to see if maybe that was a Liam Cohen thing last year. I think the most attractive thing for me, what Baker did last year was like the scramble rate stuff and his points per game on the ground that we hadn't seen before from him. And maybe that is something that's more attached to the coordinator than we're giving it credit for. And then the other one who's even later is Bryce Young, where when Bryce came back last year after being benched, he averaged 18 points per game. A little bit of it was unsustainable on the ground, but he did get more than 5 points per game with his legs, which is something that we usually only see from the pretty mobile quarterbacks. So he's one too, where you add Tedero McMillan, you have better weapons. Dave Canales year 2. Canales seems to be moving the offense in the right direction. So I think that those are two other ones that I've been targeting a bit. It just goes to show like this whole group, there's so many options late that we're bound to get a couple of hits at the end of the day that end up giving us that like Baker of 2024 season.
Yeah, Tua is one that I've taken a bunch in best ball, just looking at my stuff right now. Bryce, I certainly have Drake May, Justin Herbert through this range, but I do have the most Fields and Lamar overall for me. Leone, any final thoughts here before we move on to Superflex a little bit?
No, I think we can move on to Superflex.
All right, Superflex content. We do this every year. People say, well, we need more Superflex content from you guys, and we're trying. I've thought about it. It is very hard to do because so much depends what's going around you in the draft. When's the quarterback run going to happen? What kind of tendencies are the people you're playing against? Somebody sent me a message and they were like, I know that the elite quarterbacks are all going to go 1 through 4, and then no one else is going to take a quarterback until like round 3, even though it's Superflex. And so obviously you have to adjust your strategy for all that. Let's just say, JJ, that it is a normal-ish draft. How much are you prioritizing elite QB and Superflex? Any other Superflex thoughts and handling if it goes relatively normal in terms of ADP?
I think you could obviously make the argument that like the top half of the first round goes to the elite player, the big 4 that we were talking about earlier, right? Like getting one of those guys because of the predictability side of things, and we feel good about those players. And obviously the demand of the position is doubling and increasing. So, your VORP equation looks even better for those guys. The thing that I'll say though, overall for Superflex is I think, obviously when we're drafting, we're almost more understanding of the bottom of our tiers typically than the top of our tiers because we want to extract as much value as possible. We don't want to draft necessarily at the top of our tiers. We want to draft at the bottom of them. And I think that's going to be even a bigger deal this year in Superflex because of all the quarterbacks that we just talked about. Like all of the reasonable, viable quarterbacks that we can get in like QB 19, QB 20 range. And so I think that's going to be really key is that not getting super excited and like falling victim to a run when Baker Mayfield goes at the end of round 2 is understanding that you're going to get a player like Bryce Young, let's say, in round 7 or something. And the opportunity cost involved there is just so dramatically favors the Bryce Young team as opposed to the Baker team. And the easiest way to think of this is like, think about the odds of Bryce Young outscoring Baker Mayfield this year, right? Like of course we're going to favor Baker Mayfield, but like, I don't know, maybe like a 75-25 situation, right? Between the two in terms of like Bryce actually being better than him. And is that worth 5 or 6 rounds? Absolutely. Like, I think that kind of going with those decisions in your head with every potential quarterback selection can really help you to sort of avoid the pocket passer traps that we see and the obvious rise in cost for some of those quarterbacks that we'll see in Superflex leagues.
I think the way to build a super team, like for these SuperFlex best ball tournaments, Leone, I feel like you can build a super team by passing on quarterback and hoping to hit on something late, right? You hit on a Jaden Daniels or you hit on a Baker Mayfield late last year. Then you have a super team because you also have all the best skill players because you didn't burn early picks at quarterback. For a 12-team SuperFlex league, I don't know how viable that is. What do you think about the strategy up top, Leone, about taking quarterbacks versus skill players in Superflex?
I mean, I'm mostly echoing what JJ said because I think we're kind of aligned here, which is at the very top half of the first round, you don't want to be passing on these top 4 quarterbacks that give you such an edge at the scarcest position. Like you want to be taking one of those. But absent of that, I do think you can play like this is where you can extract the value from the quarterback position that I've been dancing around saying like I think there's value here, but I don't know how to optimize it in a 1 quarterback league. In a 2 quarterback league, if you take a tier-based approach like JJ suggested, even if you get 2 quarterbacks, let's say QB 15 plus, those 2 quarterbacks could easily be back end QB ones over the course of the season. One guy we didn't talk about much yet, JJ McCarthy for Minnesota. You know, that's a team that generally has a high pass rate over expectation, regardless who's at quarterback. Amazing skill players. It's an offense that should be pretty good, revamped O-line. So there's so many of these breakout candidates that I think it's really important to sort of hold firm and kind of like, you don't want to totally miss the run and then start dipping into, you know, the guys that don't have too much upside. But there's like 22, 24 quarterbacks that are like pretty solid this year that, you know, you make sure, you know, after like 14 of them are off the board, grab one and then maybe you grab the next one, you know, 2 in a row. Make sure you don't get completely shut out. Like that's the worst thing that can happen is you totally get shut out. But yeah, and you can take 3 quarterbacks, obviously, in a super flex league. The Anthony Richardson stuff still kind of applies in a super flex league. You also maybe want to be quick on the wire to stash a Jalen Milroe type, or just keep your eyes on, you know, some of those other situations, or maybe even someone like Sam Darnold, who is probably held down in the market because of concerns over, you know, how long he holds the job and whatnot. You know, in best ball, these are very valid concerns because we really need our quarterback starting weeks 15 to 17. In a season-long league, kind of depending on how the wire shakes out, you can take chances on these guys. But yeah, I'd be totally fine in a 2 QB 12-team league rolling out, you know, JJ McCarthy and CJ Stroud as my 2 quarterbacks. I'd be totally fine with that, knowing my skill players are much better.
Right. You come out of the draft with like McCarthy, May, and Anthony Richardson, and I'm fine with that. You know, I missed out on the elite quarterbacks. Okay, fine. I'll take those 3 back there. All right. Anything else about the quarterback position before we get out of here today?
I was just going to add with the Superflex stuff that I do think is pretty important. A lot of time, given the fact that we have such depth at the position, like 24 deep, 24 plus deep, you could argue. Like, I know like Geno Smith isn't a sexy name, right? But like he's a usable quarterback who could have plenty of top 12 weeks, right? A lot of times in these Superflex drafts, when people get their 2 quarterbacks, they're not really keeping quarterback top of mind. So if you're kind of approaching it by saying, I'm going to get Drake May, Jordan Love, and maybe Geno as my 3rd, you might get a really good value on Geno at the end because a lot of people are just done drafting quarterback after they get their 2nd.
Yeah. I don't think it's crazy to think Geno can throw a 25 touchdown passes this season whatsoever. All right. This was fun. JJ, tell the people where they can find you. If you guys want to see someone crash out in the replies on Twitter, you can follow JJ on Twitter. JJ, tell them where to find you and all your work.
Yeah, go ahead and look at my my mentions right now after saying that someone has the wrong jersey number, in my opinion. And it's just a complete IMO situation and people getting mad at me and threatening my life. Check me out on Twitter at LateRoundQB. All my stuff over on lateround.com. Yeah, you can get the draft guide right now. It's for sale. And I got the podcast, the Late Round Podcast.
Oh, man. It's so good. You know, I've said this before a bunch. Fantasy Twitter is great, man. The overwhelming percentage of people on fantasy Twitter are actually thoughtful, respectful, like I think pretty sharp guys. It's once you get NFL fan Twitter to find one of your tweets about one of their players, they have to protect this player at all costs. And so if you say something slightly negative, such as number 22 looks ridiculous on Matthew Golden, they take that as a personal
Yes.
offense to their laundry. So just you guys send stuff that sticks to fantasy Twitter. If you want to go viral though, man, fan Twitter.
It worked. It worked.
Yeah.
People, I'm still getting mentioned 3 days later with that tweet.
All right. It's enough. You can find myself at I'm Levitan on Twitter, where I will not be engaging with NFL fan Twitter. You can find Leone at 2hats1 Mike, and all of our stuff for the draft kit and everything else is on establishtherun.com. Check out the bundle. Also, preseason DFS is live on the subscribe tab as well. 1-game slate. By the time you guys listen to this, the 1-game slate will be done, but 3 full slates next week of preseason action almost makes you feel happy to be alive. For JJ, for Leone, producer Ryan, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.